This is Unforgettable Learning, where we talk to L&D visionaries, experts, and mavericks about performance, creativity, and tech. Subscribe to stay in touch. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Kate, how are you?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great.
And you are back in Toronto following Learning Technologies?
I'll give you a little Toronto shorthand so that you can be part of the cool crowd.
Okay.
If you ever want to let someone know that you're familiar with Toronto, you never pronounce the second T in
Don't
Toronto.
put the T in. Yeah. Okay. So you just Toronto.
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 Okay.
There you go.
Shall we start again?
Should we do that again? Let's do that again. Go for it.
Are you back in Toronto?
I'm back in Toronto. Yeah, it was great.
Well, look, wherever we are, we need to talk about our recent experience at Learning Technologies and what fun it was. And actually, what I really loved was the fact that it was quite a special event this time because it was Sponge's 20th birthday. I was one of the rare few people on the stand that can remember the beginning. And what I did was, what we had on the stand was a whole load of, balloons and fun celebrations. But I was roving around the tech show, interviewing people and talking to them about how they think the industry has changed in the last 20 years and how they think it's going to be shaped in the next 20. So I wanted to share some of those recordings with you and kind of just talk about where we think we've seen changes happening, what we think has really been most significant in the past, and then do a bit of kind of gazing forward and thinking about what's coming next. Are you up for it?
Yeah, and I just love the idea that you were sort of our live correspondent doing on the beat. I hope you signed off with everything reporting live. This is Kate Passerfield.
This is Kate Passerfield live from Learning Technologies XL. I wanted a press vest and a flak jacket, but I didn't get any of the equipment. So
we
next
didn't have
time.
the budget. Okay, next time. Next time.
But it was useful because I didn't get that much flak, so I didn't need it. But when I was doing my risk assessment beforehand, I did choose that I wanted that. Well, listen, let me play you some perspectives that I picked up from the show, and let me know. Let's give them a listen and see what you think.
I would say there was no digital learning, then there was bad digital learning, and now there's good digital learning.
Okay, so this is an answer to where we think things were 20 years ago and how they've changed. So I'm just going to play that again.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say there was no digital learning, then there was bad digital learning, and now there's good digital learning.
I think in the grand scheme, you've had this transition where building courses has become easier. And then because of that, there's a lot more focus on how to build good courses.
You've got bite-sized learning, you've got blended learning, you've got learning pathways.
Everybody's talking about the abundance of content and how quickly we can make it. People are starting to recognise that actually they need a strategy for how that content all works together.
How do we simplify? How do we go back to basics? How do we surface what people need when they need it?
So I feel like there's always been really good learning experiences, but our awareness of why those are good learning experiences is what is really changing.
20 years ago, we were still doing so much on paper. We had a really inflexible learning environment for people. It didn't work with their work schedules or their life schedules.
The big change in L&D has been the relationship with LMSs and LXPs and thinking about how we serve up content to employees.
Social is still probably the biggest real change.
Well, there's actually a lot of new players. I think the movement of the big ERP vendors like Workday coming into our space. So if you go back 20 years ago, SAP, Workday, Oracle had zero interest really in what this industry does. But now they all have very compelling solutions.
20 years ago, no one cared very much. It was very marginal. People spent the money, but, we'll get some results, we won't get others. I think there's a genuine sense of caring, development, and power coming now.
So there we go. That's quite fun, isn't it? And it was actually super fun running around the whole conference and just chatting to people about what they think's changed in the last 20 years. What's your take? What's your immediate take on that?
My immediate take, and this just might be a reflection of where I am in the day, was that rather than imagine that being a supercut, I just imagined you lining up 20 people in a row and just running the mic between them one at a time to get that cut. And it's just a lot more comedic to imagine it that way.
Well, we have our editor, John, to thank for it sounding that good. So, yeah. And do you know what? Now you've given me a technique for next time. I'm going to spend a lot less time at the show
Yeah, just
Line
gather
everyone
30
up.
people in a row and kind of like a conga line, just kind of like go one at a rapid fire question. No, but I mean, some really interesting responses over there. I mean, just at first, I thought the nature of those responses were so content focused, which in itself is just a great sort of reflection / indictment of what we think the industry is about. But then there were some words there that I really caught on that kind of gave me a lot of hope and optimism about sort of us being aware of what great learning always was, but now we're paying even more attention to it. The idea of care behind what we're trying to do, so it doesn't feel so transactional. And when I sort of reflect on sort of the last 20 years, not that I've been around the industry for 20 years, but certainly in the early days of my career, the idea of digital learning was very much, I always like to make the difference between digitization versus digitalization, which is kind of a little bit of a semantics piece, but there's so much emphasis on just cranking out content from binders, slides, and just in the same way we have, you know, a moment of transformation with AI, that was a moment of, oh, well, digital can get rid of the classroom. Digital can do that. And I guess that's sort of also the content bias that comes into play. And so it was great to hear sort of the back half of those responses in terms of we're starting to really care now. We're starting to care about our learners. We're starting to care about experience. That really resonated with me.
Yeah, and one of the things I think kind of became very clear as I was speaking to different people, and obviously everybody's coming from their own perspective. So some are vendor side and sort of platforms, some are L&D side, so, you know, some are consultants, some are, you know, so everybody's kind of coming at it from their own place. But in a way that sort of highlighted to me how across the board, you know, at every layer, this is an industry that for the last 20 years has been adapting and shifting and sort of trying to navigate all kinds of changes. You didn't hear the full clip from Tom Kuhlmann, but what he sort of spoke about when I interviewed him was really this idea that for a lot of the time we have been focused on content because we've had so many kind of technical problems to overcome, just practical things. And I was thinking back and I was thinking, yeah, you know, we moved from. There was a time where the cloud was not okay. You know, there was a time when it was a bit. All systems were locked down and internal, and you couldn't just distribute things as easily as that. And so even just those kinds of hurdles. I can also remember how hard it used to be to get video into courses, you know, back in the early days, to kind of 15 years ago. And now it's obviously ubiquitous, and we have whole platforms just dedicated to that. And so I get this sense that we've grown in maturity, but we've also been kind of knocking down quite practical things that are in our way that have perhaps not meant that we've been able to have a more kind of grown-up conversation around the purpose of things. And that sounds to me like one of the big shifts where people started talking about things like we now are looking at this strategically, or we're getting back to basics, or we're understanding why experiences are good. You know, we've knocked down those barriers to a huge extent in the last 20 years so that we can have that more mature discussion about what would actually work and what is going to be good. Not saying that it was immature before, but you know what I mean. It was we were sort of so preoccupied with like figuring things out.
That's such a fantastic reflection, because it is a maturation of the industry, and we needed to get through some necessary growing pains in order to get there. You know, and a lot of it is, you know, tied to funding, a lot of it tied to sort of practicalities around it, and at risk of angering the LMS elders in our community, who can probably take me through the museum of the history of time with the LMS, but I'm pretty sure the LMS was invented as mostly to solve an administrative problem.
Oh,
right?
I didn't know that. What, distribution of content?
Yeah, hosting and distribution of content. And that, if you think about it, has always been the core of the LMS. That HR buyer saying, well, I need to get courses to people and make sure that it's checked. And so there's this sort of logistical, technical problem that needed to be solved that has kind of, you see the legacy of it everywhere you go. Why SCORM exists, why we have things like authoring tools. You know, these are all kind of born out of trying to solve very technical problems of how do I get things to people faster, and how do I make sure that it's visible and scalable? And that was what digital was meant to be all about. And only now that we've solved these kind of like very tactical challenges, do we get the space in that maturity curve now to talk about, well, why are we doing the things that we're doing?
Yeah. What did you think about the comments about social? Social is the biggest shift.
I picked up on that one. I don't know. How did you read that?
Well, I thought it was interesting because I still feel like we don't lean into social as much as we should routinely. And I guess that's because classically coming from a kind of content creation background, we're so preoccupied with creating content to push out that we're, that's partly true. Of course, we're always thinking about how's the experience going to be received and how we're going to get involvement from others. I wasn't sure whether that related to things like platforms that have been enabling social interaction for however long. And it also played into me the comment about all the big ERPs coming in, like let's take Workday, Our industry was kind of small and insignificant to some extent, like for years. And then suddenly like Meta takes a look at us and goes, hey, we can be involved in this. You're like, oh, wow. So, they obviously have social at their core, and I was sort of wondering whether those, we have had social experimental interaction sort of platforms for a long time in learning, but I don't know how integrated and core they are and scaled. And also I feel like it can be hard doing asynchronous social successfely, and I just don't know whether that's been beautifully cracked yet, but maybe you have other thoughts.
And I'll be the first to say that my bias is definitely towards self-paced asynchronous learning. That is definitely my wheelhouse, more so than in-person facilitated social venues and that kind of stuff. And I agree. I agree that when you think about how critical social mechanisms are to how we learn community, I do think that is the big void that is yet to be cracked in a self-paced kind of way. And there's something, I've been working with the team sort of on this notion of a profile of today's learner. And we were thinking and talking about the reality of today's learner and actually how the digital advantage is actually turned into digital isolation. And we live in times where, because of our access to all the remote working and remote learning, that we're more isolated than ever, and craving community more than ever. And so, a $1 billion idea for anyone who's listening, you crack that code in terms of getting social right, particularly social learning, community-based learning right. There's lots of functionality out there. To come back to sort of tactical things, there's lots of functionality out there, but there's something that is more human that's missing that really needs to be a catalyst to it. So I don't necessarily agree with that statement about sort of social being the biggest change, because I think, at least from my perspective, we still have quite a long ways to go there.
Yeah, I think that speaker would also agree. I was wondering if maybe it related to the kind of under the radar social, like Teams and Slack and all of these tools that just mean that now we can immediately communicate. I was just trying to think of a good social learning experience that I did, and one that I remember, I've done a couple, but one that I remember was on a Future Learn course on learning science. And at the end of each kind of section, you were asked to reflect on your comments, and then you had to sort of post them up. And so it was like a sort of structured, facilitated forum, and then you were asked to comment on other people's comments. And actually that was quite good, but it was odd because it made me feel like I was on a stage when I was only really ready. When I wasn't really ready, I was like, I still haven't quite absorbed all these concepts yet, and I have to sort of display what I think I know. But maybe that's just like a comfort zone thing that you have to overcome, and that's why social's good, because it gets you practicing things when you're still a bit uncomfortable. But there's something exposing about doing something socially in a mass group of people you don't know when you're still in that sort of slightly new territory of a topic that you're just getting your head around. So Yeah, I think there's all sorts of considerations with social to think through.
Well, it's the same challenge with a discussion board on your LMS as it is with participating in social media, right? The irony of digital is that it all brings us together, but also has these sort of digital garden walls around us as well too, where we can't really see someone's reaction. And when you think of communication is just as much of how it's being received as it is about what's being said. And so this idea of just kind of putting something in a space and hoping that it's received in a certain way, certainly if we're talking about more vulnerable topics, DEI, leadership, that kind of stuff, you're not going to get anything authentic there because it feels very transactional in nature. And when I think of actually great social learning and action, I actually think of something like Miro as a collaborative tool, where it's like you can facilitate meetings and you can create, and creation is an act of collaboration and an act of community in a place that you can do it in sort of a democratized way as well too. That's another key thing that you're thinking about just from an educator's lens of making sure that everyone has a chance to participate. I find that's a great lens to do social because it just gives you a lot more flex than sort of doing a sort of transactional nature of question, answer, respond to, and I've certainly been on the course side and facilitated courses too, and been in courses where it's like your participation mark is reflective of how many times you respond to your peers, not necessarily about the quality of conversation. And so there's, to my point earlier, there's this environment around social learning that we need to figure out for how we operate in a digital environment socially that, we see in all kinds of ways on YouTube and social media and how it goes a terrible way that we just need to figure out in a digital context.
You make a really interesting point, and it reminds me of what is that sort of psychology that we can only be in communities as large as 100 to feel like we have a sense of belonging, and beyond that we don't. And so that raises a really large challenge for organizations, I guess, thinking about, upward of 20,000, 50,000 employees. What strategies are there out there that can kind of work at that scale? Multiple community building, I guess. Well, that's cool. Let's turn to what people said about where the next 20 years are going to go, and maybe we can chat about that and have some reflections. Let me play you this.
I don't know, is it a chip in the head?
So I think we're going to see a lot more with AI coming in, but in a really positive way.
So AI is really going to change how people can produce content.
I genuinely don't know where it will be. We'll adapt.
There probably won't be a lot of platforms per se around. It will just be genuine learning in the flow of work.
What is the human value of having somebody who has an expertise in learning theory and learning technology and business acumen, and saying, how do you best apply that human to human?
What I really, really want to change is that the AI really helps L&D to start to focus on the stuff that's actually really vital. Design is interesting and important, but it's not the most important bit. And I think it's about connecting with the business. It's about beginning to measure our impact and become valued in the business.
It's going to be totally transformed. So work and organisations are going to have to fundamentally change. The structures, the nature of work, and therefore L&D has to work in a totally new reality. Organisation will be leaky. It has to engage with different kinds of worker come into the domain. So it's going to be more complicated, but way more exciting.
Pretty interesting perspectives, I thought. I mean, AI is a kind of an obvious starting point, and wasn't it just, wallpaper at LT?
It felt like an AI-generated conference at times.
Yeah. Hey, we're new. And it isn't new, but it did feel very embraced, I would say. But in those comments, some really interesting things. I love this term leaky. I kind of do and don't, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. What? I just caught it. How did you interpret that?
Well, how I interpret that is if in the past an L&D department has been sort of closed off from the business, it's now the total opposite. We have to go out and find, and this came up in our recent chat with Peter as well. We have to go out and meet different people across the company who are going to give us different data than we would have had before. We're going to have to ask questions of different departments because we need to show impact. So the nature of work is changing. So in order to not wait for the memo but go out and sort of sense make, I think that's what it means. We can't just stay in a central place anymore. If in fact L&D have been doing that, I'm not sure to what extent they have been doing that, but that's the way I interpreted it.
I think it's hard to look at the next 20 years without looking at what the next 20 years of the workforce is going to look like.
Right.
And, if L&D is always reacting to shifts in macro trends for organizations and the workforce, the word that caught my eye was, I don't know, but we'll adapt.
Yeah.
And adaptability.
So that was great. Really honest.
Yeah. And yes, I mean, for anyone who, believes in a VUCA world, we are accelerating at a rate of change that's just unprecedented, and organizations will change. The way we work will change. The nature of that does. And of course, L&D, which is supposed to be an enabler of business outcomes, to what the other individual said, that is going to change. The nature of that's going to change. Something that kind of, as a logical consequence of AI is going to get so good at managing the knowledge economy of an organization, and that it's just going to take that whole bit away from L&D. If we don't need to manage the transaction consumption of knowledge, then what? So that's why adaptability, to me, leaky, great word, I think as well too, really resonates with me in those statements.
Interesting that you mentioned VUCA. I was looking that up the other day because I thought, I wonder what's next. And it turns out there is already something that's next after a VUCA world, and it's BANI, B-A-N-I.
Oh, yes, I heard this one.
Remember?
Yeah, tell me more, yeah.
Well, it stands for brittle, anxiety, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So now, and I think this is kind of post-COVID, we are finding ourselves in a place where our structures, systems, processes have just been proven to be brittle. Maybe they don't stand up to tests of real challenge and change, which is leading to anxiety because, what can you trust in? Where can you create a sort of concrete sense of understanding where you are and where things are going when things feel very unstable? And this idea of non-linear, that is really interesting to me because as somebody who works in storytelling sometimes and creating narratives, non-linear formats of story have always really appealed to me and been very interesting, and certainly in kind of games, and we've just this idea that things are never quite neat and clean. I don't think actually they ever were, but to me, there's a storytelling element to that side of things, and then incomprehensible speaks for itself. But what it really all stacks up to is this kind of perpetual acceleration of change means we have got to find ways to cope with this fragility and unknowingness all the time with sort of resilience and adaptability. And that word adapt just does seem perfect, doesn't it, for this BANI world that we're in? So,
remind me again, BANI: brittle, anxiety, non-linear, and incomprehensible.
Yeah, incomprehensible. Good luck.
One of my favorite memes is the "This is fine" dog who is sitting in a house of flames. And I'm just imagining the dog sipping his coffee and saying, "BANI, this is fine." It's wow. Good luck, future generations.
Right.
and I thought VUCA was bad. My gosh.
I know. Well, and it just, I don't know how kind of official BANI is, but it's definitely out there as a kind of concept, and I think that those things do resonate. And as we get more of this AI emerging, somebody who, I don't know if it was in one of the clips, but somebody said, one of the things we can be sure about is that what seems like a good idea to use AI for today is not going to seem like a good idea to use AI for in a year's time, because it will change and there'll be something else. And so, we kind of have to be aware of that hyperspeed of change and work out strategies that are going to, I guess, fit into a very fast and shifting world.
And I think that is going to be the one big test of the paradigm that we currently live in, is that our model for L&D, and I use that in the broadest brushstroke ever, is too slow and it's not adaptable. And to the point of we will adapt, either that paradigm will break or we will evolve with it, because it is not fast enough to keep up with the pace of a business or the pace of how people need to respond to what the business needs to do. And so to find sort of a pragmatist light in the Banny world, we do need to figure out how we can find ways to be non-linear, which is not our forte, to be more comprehensible in the incomprehensible, because there's too much rigidity and slowness, I would say, in what we're trying to do. And partially is because, well, we're coming on maybe the other side of the maturity curve of still trying to solve legacy technical challenges that we haven't had time to confront the challenges of today.
I think you're right. And when you said legacy earlier, it really struck me that some of the companies that I saw at Learning Technologies, booths, a lot of the startups felt fresh precisely because they didn't have to contend with any legacy tech. And I was just thinking, wow, where you're able to be successful because you can just spin something up, you can leverage what's existing, you don't have any tech debt, you don't have any integration updates. I mean, these are normal infrastructural questions that people have expertise in solving, but it did seem like, yeah, that is the crux of it. That old relationship with our LMSs, with our LXPs, with anything that kind of slows us down in the distribution. But I guess also, have we been slow to recognize what makes things good? Has it taken us too long to go, learning experiences that are emphasizing consolidation and practice are really where we want to be going with X program. Whereas with something else over here, we're able to pick some inflow solution, or a social answer. Is our vocabulary as broad as it needs to be in order to pick a relevant solution for the right moment, for the right problem? And there's an element of speed there too, I think.
And things like LT become great sort of hold points in this conversation, because I was giving an interview at LT, and the question was, what excites you about being an LT? And one of the responses I put towards it is that it's exciting from a vendor standpoint to show up once a year or however many times a year to these shows you want to go to, and find the alignment between what you think the market needs versus where the market is exactly, and speaking to real customers about what their challenges are. And if you think about sort of what I guess a trade show exists at its highest level, is this is where we want to go versus where we are today. And what's funny in my experience from that, certainly we're seeing so much of AI being a presence over there, but when you talk to customers, they're still facing the same challenges they've always been facing. LMS migration, this content as quickly as possible, translations, all these kind of very kind of tactical in the weed stuff. And to your point about vocabulary, I think you're totally right in the sense of it's a bit of chicken and egg, in the sense of who is going to take a lead in broadening the vocabulary of the ways we can try and solve these problems. Because when I was there, and obviously we are part of that narrative as well too, the answers were content platform, AI content, AI platform, And to your point of vocabulary, is like, well, are there novel ways to try and solve that problem before the Banny world comes for us and solves it for us anyway?
One way or the other. Yeah. Yeah. So you've touched on a few interesting things about the future in terms of kind of what was your sort of takeaway? I mean, we don't have to talk about 20 years in the future, but what was your kind of takeaway from, you did a talk, you did interviews, you walked the floor, perhaps you went to some other talks that were in the bit upstairs. What do you think would be your takeaway for the sort of immediate future?
Well, I'll I'll start actually with my talk, not because I feel like being highly self-indulgent, but actually more because I thought it makes a lot of sense to communicate. And that is the idea behind the talk was that we're all trying to be strategic, yet we don't have the time and capacity to be strategic. So the idea was elevating strategic thinking for busy people. And it was received quite well as sort of concept and a framework for it. But it was just a reminder for me as validation in the discussions I was having after that this is the thing that people are most trying to solve. That get me out of the daily engine of output and help me be more strategic. And it was just, it almost felt like a moment of catharsis, I would say, in the room to say, oh, well, I'm glad we're having this conversation because yes, of course I need content and platforms, but what I really need is strategic support. And so it was kind of great to have that validation in the moment. And then the other piece, of course, you can't help but think and talk about AI. It dominated everything in the conversations. But my sort of reflection, 48 hours afterwards, coming back to Toronto, was patience, which is kind of a weird word to bring with AI, because everything is, and maybe this was just sort of the emphatic announcement of ChatGPT when it arrived as this like beautiful silver bullet that we've never seen ever in our lives before. And it was just, and so flashy and fun and ridiculous at times as well too. But I think we've just become obsessed as a society with the potential of AI that we're just kind of expecting it to be a flick of a switch, and I think in hearing some of the sessions, the thing that I reflected on most was we don't have a lot of the answers yet. We've got a lot of experimentation, and I could feel like the energy in the room has moved away from this is cool, people are experimenting with it, to now being like, okay, well, give me a meaningful use case that is more than just accelerating learning design and creating efficiency in content production. Give me a meaningful use case. And we're not there yet. And that's okay. That's okay. I always say L&D is the last mover. We have the privilege of being the last mover. There will be other industries, the medical field, that will see the impact and the potential of AI in a much more profound way than we do. But maybe we just need a little bit of patience to understand in that maturity curve, of solving technical problems. Maybe we just need to get sort of the tactical things out of our system with what we want to do with AI until the real meaningful use case emerges for it. So I walked away with patience coming out of the impatience, I would say, with AI. That was my biggest reflection.
Yeah, that's a great reflection. Patience. I think I can meaningful use cases and keeping things moving forward with a degree of reflection too, which is kind of ironic when we said that we need to move faster, but we also need to have time to be strategic. Maybe it's about placing our emphasis where are we placing our emphasis? I think I came away. It's funny, isn't it? Because I've been doing these shows for a really long time, and thinking back and thinking forward, I think my takeaway was that if we're an industry that's perpetually been under change for the last 20 years, and we seem to have reached a place of maturity, let's say, and growing maturity, then I'm optimistic that we can weather out the next set of change. I think we're going to need some new tools to do that in terms of sort of mindsets and capabilities, and talking about that increased vocabulary. There's going to be new ways of doing things that we might need to be open to experimenting with. But I think we seem like an industry of people who care about the right things and want to explore that and get it right. So I actually came away more optimistic than I was expecting to be, given the swathe of AI that was everywhere.
Well, I think your optimism is the right antidote we need to face the Banny world coming our way. So,
well, it's been fantastic to talk to you about this, Josh, and we will speak again soon. But yeah, thank you so much for all of your thoughtful comments, and we will leave it there for today.
You too. Thanks, Kate.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to stay up to date with leading lights from L&D and leave us a review to let us know what you think.